This bill has nothing to do with integrity. It has everything to do with ideology. It has everything to do with the government's relentless ideological attack on Australian unions and the workers they seek to represent and protect. It's an attack on working people and on freedom of association. It will undermine our democracy. Australians haven't forgotten work choices, and they won't forget this bill.
What this bill is really all about is another attempt by this government, just what they did after the 2004 election when they overreached with a friendly Senate and introduced the work choices legislation that ripped off unions and ripped off working people. They're at it again with this bill now. The government's cover was actually blown yesterday in question time when Minister Payne was asked questions about what the government's plans were about its so-called IR reform. Last week, the Minister for IR flagged an intention to bring in new industrial laws, and yesterday Minister Payne was given every opportunity to rule out watering down unfair dismissal laws or to change the way enterprise agreements are assessed. The minister would not do that yesterday.
The union movement has done more to maintain the integrity of our civil society than those opposite will ever know. Their ideological hatred of the union blinds them to the struggles ordinary people have waged to obtain many of the rights, opportunities and privileges we now take for granted. First Nations know this struggle very well, and indeed the union movement has been an important ally in the fight that First Nations have struggled to get civil and land rights recognised.
Make no mistake, when we weaken the right of working people to raise their concerns, when we weaken the right of working people to come together collectively, to bargain, to negotiate, to demand, to agitate for better wages, for better conditions and for safer working places, when we make that harder, we weaken not only the economy, we weaken the very fabric of our society, we weaken the very safety that Australians have enjoyed in their workplace.
We have before us a bill that purports to be about ensuring integrity, but this bill does no such thing. It's a silly name for a bill with a sinister purpose. It's not about integrity. It's about quelling political dissent and making Australian workers stay quiet. Quiet, pliant and obedient. Quiet about fair pay, quiet about conditions, quiet about safe workplaces, quiet about taking collective action or bargaining wage outcomes together as a group. This bill seeks to impose on one part of civil society a set of standards that the government is unwilling to apply elsewhere, least of all to its front bench.
This bill, like its predecessor, is draconian. It is anti-democratic and it is unnecessary. Despite its name, this legislation has absolutely nothing to do with ensuring integrity, but everything to do with ideology and opportunism, and this government's pathological hatred of unions and the workers that they seek to represent and to protect.
The truth is that this bill takes Australia backwards towards authoritarianism and backwards towards a diminished democracy. Our democratic institutions are weakened every day by a government that doesn't have a plan for the big issues that face Australia.
This proposed law is nothing more and nothing less than an attack by powerful vested interests in the government, in those opposite, and by those who buy outcomes in this government on the most vulnerable of Australian workers who reach out for help from their union. It's an attack on the lowest paid, and it's an attack on those organisations that fight for those people.
This repressive piece of legislation is just the latest reminder that the fight to protect and advance the rights of working people is never over. It's a powerful reminder that when Scott Morrison says he supports quiet Australians, what he really means is that he wants Australians facing injustice, stagnating wages and threats to their working conditions to stay silent.
We'll fight this, as Senator Wong has said, and we won't be diminished by it. There's no way you can diminish the power of a union. When people decide to act collectively with diligence, common sense, fortitude, there's no way you can beat it.
There being 34 ayes and 34 noes, the question is negated, which means there's not support for the bill.
government last week were so desperately trying to call into question the integrity of trade unions, and I'm glad they were unsuccessful, because there is nothing wrong with the integrity of hard-working union members. This government is obsessed with scrutinising trade unions, but they are so desperate to avoid accountability and scrutiny themselves.